Have you ever sat in a quiet house, late at night, and realized that the silence wasn't peaceful but heavy? It is a specific kind of weight. It presses against your chest. It makes the ticking of the clock sound like a countdown you didn't ask for. There are truths we avoid for years, hiding them under busy schedules and routine conversations. But then, there are moments where the truth sits right across from you, staring you in the face, and you simply cannot look away anymore. We often think that heartbreak is a loud event. We imagine screaming, throwing things, the shattering of glass. But as we get older, we learn that the most devastating heartbreak is often the quietest. It is the realization that the person supposed to be your partner has become a stranger, and you are the only one still holding on to the rope. It was 10:43 p.m. The hallway light cast a long, stretched shadow across the kitchen floor, cutting the room in half. I was standing on the dark side of it, leaning against the cold granite counter. My phone was in my hand, the screen glowing bright in the dim room. It was ringing for the second time. I watched the name on the screen. Harper. I didn't pick up immediately. I let it ring. I took a breath, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the settling of the house. I was trying to steady my hands. When I finally slid my thumb across the screen to answer, I didn't say hello. I just listened. Still at dinner? I asked. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. It sounded like a man who was merely curious, not a man who felt his world tilting on its axis. There was a beat of silence on the other end, a hesitation. Yeah, Harper said. Her voice was smooth, practiced. She sounded almost bored, or perhaps she was feigning exhaustion. Mark ordered a second bottle of wine. I didn't want to be rude. Mark, her co-worker, the name that had been floating around our house for weeks like a bad smell. Mark, the one who had suddenly become fascinating enough to steal her Friday nights. Mark, who apparently needed her attention more than her husband of 15 years did. I looked down at the glass of red wine in my hand. I swirled it slowly, watching the dark liquid coat the sides of the glass. I thought you said you'd be home by 10 o'clock. I said. I kept my eyes fixed on the wine. If I looked up, even at the empty kitchen, I might lose my nerve. I said, maybe 10 o'clock, she replied instantly. The defensive edge was there now, sharp and quick. I didn't know I needed a curfew, Caleb. The arrogance in her voice didn't even try to hide itself. It wasn't the tone of a wife who was running late and felt bad about keeping her husband waiting. It was the tone of a woman who resented being asked where she was. She wasn't denying anything. She was testing me. She was daring me to call her out. What are you doing, Harper? I asked. Having dinner, she said. Then came the sigh, that long, exasperated exhale that I come to dread. It was the sound of her patience snapping. Don't make this into something it's not, Caleb. Please. I closed my eyes. You're dressed like it's a date? I said softly. You changed your lipstick after I kissed you goodbye this morning. You've been checking your phone all day like it's a lifeline to somewhere else. Silence. I'm not doing this, I continued, my voice dropping an octave. So, I will ask you one more time. What are you doing? There was a pause, and then laughter. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was small, sharp, and rehearsed. It was the kind of laugh people use when they want to make you feel foolish for asking a reasonable question. Are you really jealous? She asked. Caleb, honestly, we have been stuck in neutral for months. I needed to feel human again. I needed conversation. I let that sit between us. The implication hung heavy in the air. She was justifying it. She was acting as if stepping out on your marriage was some new age form of self-care, as if betraying your vows was just a way to feel human. You could have talked to me, I said. If you needed conversation, I was right here. I tried, she snapped. The boredom was gone now, replaced by anger. You stopped listening a long time ago. No, I corrected her, and this time my voice was hard. I stopped begging. She exhaled hard into the phone. I could hear the background noise now. Clinking silverware, the low hum of a restaurant, or maybe just the silence of a car where she sat alone with him. I'm not going to stand here and get scolded like a child, she said. You're not a child, I said quietly, but you are acting like one. You are running off for validation, and then hiding behind buzzwords like connection and personal growth. You aren't enlightened, Harper. You're just selfish. That hit her. I heard her intake of breath. You don't get to call me selfish, she hissed. Not after the last year. You've been emotionally absent for months, Caleb. You think buying groceries and folding laundry makes you a good husband. I think not cheating does. I said, there it was. I had said the word. Cheating. The silence that followed was longer this time. Heavier. It was the silence of a bluff being called. She didn't deny it. She didn't gasp in outrage. She just stopped speaking. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. It was a cold, hard realization that the woman on the other end of the phone didn't respect me enough to tell me the truth. And she didn't love me enough to come home. I twisted the knife, not in rage, but with a surgical precision that surprised even me. Don't rush, I said calmly. Take your time. What? She sounded confused. I said don't rush. I repeated, I have guests too. Her voice cracked. The arrogance vanished in a split second. What do you mean, guests? I smiled. It was a sad smile, staring down at the knife I had used to dice shallots an hour earlier. The kitchen smelled the potential of a meal that was waiting to be cooked. Company, I said. You know how it is. Harper. Dinner. Wine. Conversation. Real connection. Just like you said. Who is there? She demanded. Her voice rose. Caleb, who is in our house? I didn't answer. I didn't know her an answer. Enjoy your night, I said. And then, before she could say another word, before she could spin another lie, or demand another explanation, I ended the call. The kitchen was silent again. But this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was vibrating. My heart was hammering against my ribs. The panic was starting to set in, the realization of what I had just implied, and what I now had to do. I had called her bluff. Now I had to make it real. There is a specific kind of panic that sets in when you realize you just declared war, but you have no soldiers on the field. After I ended the call with Harper, the bravado evaporated instantly. The silence rushed back into the kitchen, louder than before. I stared at my phone, the screen turning black in my hand. My heart was thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had told her I had guests. I had told her I had company. I had implied that while she was out finding herself with another man, I was here, moving on. But the truth was, I was alone. Just me, a half-empty glass of wine, and a pile of chopped shallots that were starting to dry out on the board. I needed to make the lie true. Or rather, I needed to make the reality match the confidence I had just projected. My thumb hovered over the contact list. I scrolled past names of drinking buddies, colleagues, the kind of friends you call for a barbecue, but not for a crisis. And then my finger stopped. Lena, we hadn't spoken much in the last few months. Life happens. Marriages happen. Or, in my case, marriages start to fail, and you stop reaching out to people who know you best because you're ashamed to admit that things aren't working. Lena and I had a history that predated Harper. It wasn't a romantic history. Exactly. It was something sturdier. It was clean. No drama. No baggage. Just years of being in the same orbit, understanding each other's shorthand. Right now, I didn't need passion. I didn't need advice. I needed clean. I needed someone who wouldn't ask me to explain the wreckage before helping me clear it away. I pressed call. She picked up before the second ring. Caleb. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask, what's up? She just said my name. That is the thing about old friends. They can hear the weather in your voice before you even speak. I didn't say hello. I thought to myself. I didn't have the energy for pleasantries. Are you free tonight? I asked. My voice was low, raspy. There was a pause on the line. A beat where she assessed the situation. Lena was never one to fill silence with nervous chatter. Do you need me to be? She asked. That was Lena, always skipping past the fluff. Straight to the bone of the matter. I was wondering if you'd come over, I said, looking around my empty kitchen. Help me cook. A small laugh floated through the line. It wasn't mocking. It was warm. That is the weirdest rescue call I have ever received. You okay? I hesitated. I could have lied. I could have said I was fine. But the weight of the last hour was crushing me. Not really, I admitted. Okay, she said simply. I'll be there in 30. She hung up. No questions. No, let me check my schedule. Just action. True to her word. She arrived 27 minutes later. When I opened the door, the air in the hallway shifted. She was standing there wearing jeans, a simple white t-shirt under a loose gray cardigan, and her hair was pulled up in a lazy, messy knot. She didn't look like she had dressed for an occasion. She looked like comfort. She looked like a break from the storm. I stepped aside to let her in. Thanks for coming. She walked past me into the kitchen, her eyes scanning the room. She took it all in. The dim lighting I had set to create a mood I wasn't feeling, the spices scattered across the counter, the half-prepped chopping board beside the sink. She turned to me, one eyebrow raised. You making your ginger noodles or starting a ritual? She asked. I half smiled. It felt tight on my face, but it was there. A little of both, maybe. Lena glanced at the open wine bottle on the counter, then at the single glass I had been nursing. She looked back at me, her expression softening. She saw the tension in my shoulders. She saw the way I was holding myself, like I was bracing for an impact. You want to talk about it? She asked. Or you just want to cook? Just play along, I said, reaching for a spare apron hanging on the pantry door. I passed it to her. We'll cook, maybe talk later. Right now I just need noise. Good noise. She nodded once. She tied her hair tighter, looped the apron over her head, and got to work. That is the beauty of a person like Lena. She is not a fixer. She doesn't try to analyze you while you are bleeding. She is a presence. She just exists beside you, and somehow that makes the room feel less empty. She didn't push for the backstory. She didn't ask where Harper was, though she surely noticed the absence. I turned on the stove. I poured sesame oil into the skillet, watching it shimmy as the heat rose. Lena stood beside me, picking up the knife I had abandoned. She started julienning the carrots. The rhythm of the blade against the wood was steady, confident. Chop, chop, chop. She hadn't stepped foot in this kitchen for over a year, yet she moved like she belonged here. Still used the same knives, she muttered, testing the weight of the blade in her hand. Dull like always. I smirked, stirring the oil. Some things never change. She glanced at me sideways, her eyes dark and intelligent. Some do. We cooked mostly in silence after that. But it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence I had shared with Harper over the phone. This was a companionable silence. It was a rhythm of boiling water, the sizzle of garlic meeting hot oil, the gentle scrape of wooden spoons against pans. It was the kind of silence that doesn't press or linger. It just is. At one point, she reached up to grab a jar of soy sauce from the top shelf. The sleeves of her cardigan were loose, and as she reached, they slipped down. Here, I said, you'll get soy sauce on that wool. I walked over to the hook by the back door and pulled down one of my hoodies. It was an old navy blue one, soft from years of washing. I handed it to her. Put this on, I said. She paused, holding the jar in one hand and the hoodie in the other. She looked at the fabric, then at me. It wasn't a random gesture. We both knew that. Handing a woman your clothes is intimate. It suggests a level of comfort that goes beyond dinner guest. Are you cold? I asked, feigning ignorance. She studied my face for a second, then gave a small shake of her head, as if deciding not to argue. Freezing. She pulled the hoodie on. It swallowed her frame, the sleeves hanging past her hands. She pushed them up to her elbows. It hit me then. That moment wasn't accidental. I hadn't handed her that hoodie just to protect her cardigan. It had been deliberate. I was setting a stage. But as I watched her standing there, stirring the sauce in my clothes, it didn't feel like a stage anymore. Problem? She asked, catching me staring. I shook my head. No, just thinking. Dangerous, she teased, tossing noodles into boiling water with a little too much flair. Water splashed onto the stove, hissing. The scent of ginger, garlic, and scallions began to fill the apartment. It was warm, grounding, familiar. For the first time in weeks, the apartment didn't feel like a place I was trying to escape. It felt like a home again. We opened a second bottle of wine. Lena leaned back against the counter, barefoot now, swirling her glass slowly. The cooking was done. We were just waiting. "I'm not going to ask what is going on," she said, her voice dropping to a serious register. "But if this is your way of getting back at her, it's working." I looked up from the pan of sauce. "I didn't invite you for revenge, Lena." "No," she said, tilting her head. "Then why did you invite me, Caleb?" I thought about it for a moment. The truth tasted heavier than I expected. I could have said I was lonely. I could have said I was panic-stricken. Because I needed someone here who wasn't pretending. I said. Lena studied me for a beat. Her eyes searched mine, looking for the lie, but finding only exhaustion. "Okay," she said gently. "Then let's not pretend." And just like that, she stepped in closer. Not flirtatious, not needy. Just there, steady, real. She grabbed a ladle from my hand and stirred the sauce herself, her shoulder brushing against mine. The contact was electric, not in a sexual way, but in a human way. It was the feeling of not being alone. "Good ginger," she muttered, tasting the sauce. "Good company," I replied. I glanced at the clock on the microwave. It read 11:12 p.m. The door hadn't opened yet. Harper wasn't home. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't care when that door would open. I wasn't waiting for her anymore. I was already here. The sound of a front door unlocking is usually a mundane thing. It is a metallic scrape, a click, a heavy thud of wood against a frame. But when you are waiting for a moment that will define the rest of your life, that sound becomes a thunderclap. The clock read 11:12 p.m. The lock turned. It didn't come with hesitation. It clicked open like nothing was out of place. Harper was coming home, likely expecting to find me asleep or sulking on the couch with the lights off. She expected the husband she left behind, the one who waited, the one who worried. But the second the door opened, Lena and I exchanged a glance. It wasn't a panicked look. We didn't scramble to separate. Lena didn't stop stirring the sauce. I didn't move to the hallway to greet my wife. We stayed exactly where we were. The aroma of garlic, soy, jasmine rice, and ginger noodles clung to warm air like a secret. The kitchen light was dim, golden, the kind that makes everything feel a little softer or a little more intimate, depending on who is watching. I heard Harper's heels click on the entryway tile. Then silence. She had paused. She was smelling the air. She was sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. Then came the cautious steps. She appeared in the archway to the kitchen. Her hair was slightly frizzed from the late-night air, and her coat was still draped over her shoulders. She looked like someone who had been rushing or perhaps running away. Her eyes took in the scene like a camera snapping frames she couldn't process fast enough. Frame 1, the steam rising from the pot. Frame 2, 2 wine glasses on the counter. Frame 3, Lena, standing at our stove. Lena, barefoot. Lena, wearing my navy blue hoodie, the sleeves pushed up, looking for all the world like she had been living in this kitchen for years. Harper stood frozen. Her hand was still gripping her purse strap, her knuckles white. "Lena," Harper said finally. Her voice tried for casual, but it landed somewhere near brittle. "In my hoodie, barefoot at our stove. Smells different in here." I turned slowly, wiping my hands on a kitchen towel. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at her. "Lena offered to cook," I said calmly. I figured since I had nothing to look forward to tonight, I would take her up on it. Harper's face didn't flinch, but her fingers twitched. That was the tell. The tiny crack in the porcelain. Lena, still stirring the noodles, didn't even turn around immediately. She finished her motion, tapped the spoon on the side of the pot, and then turned. "Hope you don't mind," Lena said. Her tone was easy, polite. "We were just finishing up." "Of course not," Harper replied, a little too fast. She walked into the room, reclaiming her territory with a click of her heels. "I'm just surprised. You usually hate company this late, Caleb." I shrugged. "Lena isn't company. She's an old friend." Harper's eyes narrowed just a fraction. She looked from me to Lena, connecting dots that didn't exist, but fearing them all the same. Oh, sure, old friends who wear your hoodie like they have lived here. Lena finally smiled. It was soft, unreadable. He offered. I was cold. Harper's gaze flicked down to the oversized sleeves, then up to me. Sharp. Right. Of course he did. She walked to the counter and set her purse down. It hit the granite with a heavy thud. She looked at the wine bottle. It was nearly empty. You said you had guests, Harper said, looking at me. Plural. I do, I said, gesturing to the table. The table was already set. I had set it 10 minutes ago. 3 plates. 2 were placed near each other, with chopsticks resting precisely on the napkins. The 3rd plate was set a little further away, near the head of the table. You hungry? I asked. She hesitated. She looked at the food, then at the 2 of us standing in a unified front of the kitchen work triangle. She had a choice. She could storm out, make a scene, and demand to know why another woman was cooking in her house. But she couldn't. Not really. Because she had just come from dinner with Mark. She had lost the moral high ground hours ago. She had no choice but to sit. I could eat, she said stiffly. We ate in a slow, delicate silence. Or rather, Lena and I ate. Harper moved noodles around her plate, like she was tracing answers in the sauce. Every bite I took tasted like victory, though a hollow one. Every moment of eye contact I shared with Lena, a simple nod when she passed the soy sauce, a shared smirk when the pepper shaker stuck, echoed louder than any scream might have. We had a rhythm. Harper was a disruption. So, Lena, Harper said, tilting her wine glass just slightly. The liquid threatened to spill, dangerously close to the rim. What brings you here tonight? Besides late-night cravings and nostalgia, it was a dig, a polite, socially acceptable claw swipe. Lena swallowed a bite of noodles and dabbed her mouth with a napkin. She smiled without warmth. Caleb texted, she said he could use a hand in the kitchen. I had nothing better to do. Nothing better? Harper echoed. She took a sip of wine, swallowing back something that tasted far worse than the vintage. How lucky for him. I looked at Harper then. I looked her straight in the eye. It has been a quiet week, I said. I missed having a reason to smile. That landed. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. The room went dead silent. The ticking of the wall clock seemed to amplify. I didn't let her reply. I didn't give her the space to spin it. I stood up, gathered my empty plate, and moved toward the sink. I'm done, I said. Behind me, Lena stood up too. I'll help you with the dishes. You cooked, I said. You don't have to clean. I don't mind, she said cheerfully. She followed me to the sink without asking. Harper sat alone at the table. Her jaw was tight, her fingers wrapped around the stem of her wine glass like it might anchor her to a reality that was slipping away. There was no yelling, no slamming of doors, just the quiet unraveling of a woman who realized the chessboard had shifted while she was out playing a different game. She realized that the king wasn't where she left him. The water ran warm over my hands. Lena stood next to me, drying the plates I washed. We stood shoulder to shoulder. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. The intimacy of domestic labor, washing, drying, stacking, was a language all its own. Harper watched us from the table. I could feel her eyes burning into my back. She was watching a life that looked like hers, in a kitchen that was hers, with a husband that was hers. But she wasn't in the scene. She was the audience. After the last plate was dried, Lena folded the towel. I should get going, she said. I'll walk you out, I said. We walked past the dining table. Harper didn't move. She didn't say good night. She just stared at the empty space where Lena's plate had been. At the door, Lena slipped out of her shoes. She started to pull off the hoodie, grabbing the hem. Keep it, I said quickly. She paused, the fabric halfway up her torso. She looked at me. It's cold out, I said. Bring it back later. Or don't. She smiled, pulled it back down, and adjusted the sleeves. Thanks, Caleb. Thank you, I whispered. The door clicked shut behind her. I didn't say goodbye. Neither did Harper. The apartment was quiet now, just a faint hum of the dishwasher and the ticking wall clock Harper insisted we keep, even though it never matched real time. Funny, the little things that suddenly feel ancient. I turned back toward the living room. Harper was standing now. She was frozen near the dining table, her half-finished wine glass still clutched in her hand. She looked smaller than she had this morning. "You didn't tell me she was coming," Harper said. Her voice was low, trembling. I stayed leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Didn't know I needed to. Her eyes narrowed. The sadness was pivoting to anger now. The defense mechanism was kicking in. "So that is how we're doing things now?" she asked. "You invite women over? Play house while I'm out? What is this, Caleb? Testing how far you can push me." I didn't move. I didn't uncross my arms. Lena cooked. I ate. It wasn't a game, Harper. "You're lying," she snapped. "You did this to punish me." There it was. The edge. The heat. The flicker of panic she had kept masked in front of Lena was finally spilling over. "Funny," I said slowly, pushing off the wall and walking toward the dining room. I stopped a few feet from her. "I thought you said your dinner with Mark was just that. Dinner. Are we judging intentions now?" She stepped toward me faster than I expected. "It's not the same." "Sure it is," I said evenly. "You went out to find something you weren't getting here." "So, did I? Only I didn't have to leave the apartment to do it." The glass in her hand trembled so hard I thought the stem might snap. "Don't you dare compare the two," she whispered. "I'm not comparing," I said, leaning slightly closer. "I'm showing you the mirror." Her face flushed. I saw it then, the crack forming beneath her composed exterior. The place where control used to live was starting to collapse inward. She realized that I wasn't just hurt. I was indifferent. And to a narcissist, indifference is far worse than hate. "So what?" she said, her voice rising. "She is your backup plan now? Your sweet little comfort project in a hoodie? Does she even know what she is walking into?" "She knows I needed peace tonight," I replied, and she gave it without question. Harper let out a breath that sounded halfway between a scoff and a sob. "You're being cruel, Caleb." "No," I said. "I'm being still." She flinched. "What does that even mean?" "It means I'm not fighting you anymore. Harper, you have already picked your battlefield. I'm just refusing to show up." Her jaw clenched. The muscles in her neck pulled tight, a physical manifestation of the control she was losing. "That is worse, Caleb," she said, her voice shaking. "This indifference, it is manipulative." I gave a tired half-smile. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was a resignation of a man who realizes the person standing in front of him speaks a completely different language. You don't get to call it manipulation just because it doesn't center you, Harper, I said. She turned away sharply, pacing toward the hallway, then back again. Her heels clicked frantically on the floor, a staccato rhythm of panic. "You used her to get at me." "No," I said. "I used her company to get away from the silence. If that stung you, that is on you." A silence fell between us again. This one wasn't sharp like before. It was hollow. It was cold. It was the silence of two people who had both reached a high wall, and neither had the energy or the desire to climb over it. She sat down heavily in the chair Lena had just left. Her hand brushed the table where Lena's plate had been, as if checking for residue. Her eyes stayed on the wood grain of the table. "I didn't think you would actually do something like this," she whispered. "Funny," I said softly. "That is exactly what I thought when you walked out the door for dinner tonight." She looked up. Her eyes were wet. Her voice, this time, cracked for real. "Do you even care what happens to us?" I paused. I let the question breathe. I let it float in the air between us, mixing with the fading scent of ginger and wine. I looked at the woman I had married, the woman I had built a life with, and I searched for the panic I used to feel whenever we fought. I searched for the desperate need to fix it, to apologize, to smooth things over. I found nothing. "You should have asked that," I said, "before you decided we were optional." I turned off the kitchen light, leaving her sitting there in the glow of the hallway lamp, and I went to bed. I slept in the guest room. She didn't come to find me. Morning arrived without fanfare. The sky was a soft, bruised gray, one of those muted autumn dawns where everything feels heavier than it should. The light filtering through the blinds was weak, struggling to push back the shadows. I was already in the kitchen by 6:30. I was dressed. I was calm. My sleeves were rolled to my forearms as I cracked eggs into a mixing bowl. Crack, whisk, crack, whisk. The rhythm was soothing. It was a task with a beginning and an end. It was something I could control. Harper came in about 20 minutes later. She didn't say a word. She shuffled across the hardwood in her slippers, pulling my old cardigan tighter around her shoulders like it still had something to offer her. She looked smaller in the daylight. Her eyes were swollen, just enough that only I would notice. The makeup from the night before was gone, leaving her face pale and exposed. She poured herself a mug of coffee with the practiced movements of someone who needed something, anything, to feel normal. The clink of her spoon against the ceramic mug was the only sound in the room, besides the whisking of the eggs. I didn't look up. I just added a splash of cream, pinched some salt with my fingers, and sprinkled it into the bowl. The skillet warmed behind me, already greased, waiting. Harper leaned against the counter, watching me work. I could feel her gaze. It was a look I couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't sadness. It was something weary, wary. She looked like she was waiting for me to lash out. She was waiting for the explosion, for the accusations, for the yelling match that would allow her to play the victim again. But I didn't yell. I wasn't interested in punishing her. That was too small. That was too reactive. No, what I was after wasn't retaliation. It was clarity. And clarity only comes with distance. Want some? I asked, motioning to the pan with the whisk, not turning fully toward her. She paused, caught off guard by the civility. She hesitated, then gave the tiniest nod. Sure. I poured the eggs in, listening to the soft hiss as they hit the hot surface. I moved slowly, deliberately. I folded the eggs over, watching the liquid turn to solid. The smell of butter filled the kitchen. It was familiar and nostalgic in a way that felt almost inappropriate now. How could the kitchen smell like a lazy Sunday morning when the marriage inside it was dying? We sat across from each other at the breakfast bar. 2 plates between us. 2 mugs. The overhead light cast shadows that split the silence. She didn't speak. Neither did I. I ate my eggs. I drank my coffee. I existed. Finally, I set my fork down. I wiped my mouth and spoke, almost absent-mindedly, as if checking a weather report. Lena mentioned her hiking group meets on Sundays. I might join. Her fork froze midair. I didn't look at her. I took another sip of coffee. She didn't respond right away. She chewed slowly, swallowing without urgency, buying time. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but brittle, like dry leaves ready to crumble. "Since when you hike?" she asked. "Since I stopped sitting still," I replied. That answer sliced deeper than any raised voice ever could. I saw it land. I watched her eyes shift, calculating, defensive, trying to form a response that would reclaim ground without admitting how deeply the comment had cut. "That group is all couples," she said, a little too fast. "You will stick out." I shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I won't." She tightened her grip on the mug. "Lena isn't your therapist, Caleb." I met her gaze then. She never claimed to be. Something in her cracked right then. I could see it in the way her shoulders tensed. She set her fork down with a clatter. She couldn't eat any more. "So, what?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and indignation. "You two are hiking now? Making noodles and walking to the woods like it is some kind of courtship." I raised an eyebrow. "Does it feel like one?" She looked away, her jaw clenched. "It feels like you're trying to erase me." I set my mug down. I leaned forward just an inch. "No, Harper," I said gently. "I am not trying to erase you. I am trying to remember who I was before I needed to be managed." That one hit hard. She didn't mask it well. Her face crumbled slightly, the mask of the indignant wife slipping to reveal the frightened woman underneath. The rest of the breakfast passed in silence. The kind of silence that hums loud with everything neither of you dare say. When I stood up to rinse my plate, she didn't move. She sat there, staring into her cold coffee. I didn't need to look back to know she was watching me. And I knew, without her saying a word, that something irreversible had happened. For years, our dynamic had been simple. She ran and I chased. She acted out and I fixed it. She was the storm and I was the shelter. But this morning, the shelter was gone. She was no longer waiting for me to chase her. Now, she was sitting in the wreckage, wondering what it meant that I hadn't moved a muscle to stop her. I placed my plate in the dishwasher, dried my hands, and walked out the kitchen. I had a hike to get to, and for the first time in months, the path ahead looked clear. There is a specific kind of humiliation in learning the truth about your own life from a stranger. It is not the sting of the secret itself that hurts the most. It is the realization that you were the last person to know. You realize that while you were agonizing over the silence in your home, the world outside was already talking about the noise. That Saturday started like any other. I folded laundry. I watered the plants. I answered a few emails that I didn't care about just to keep my hands moving. The routine was a shield. If I kept moving, I didn't have to feel the weight of the air in the apartment. Harper was somewhere in the rooms, silent and hovering like static. We hadn't spoken much since the breakfast where I mentioned the hiking group. The air between us had thickened into something permanent. It wasn't angry anymore. It was just dense. You had to push through it just to walk down the hall. Midday, I went out to grab groceries. It was more out of habit than necessity. I needed to see people who didn't know me, faces that didn't hold any history. I was in the self-checkout line, scanning a bag of apples, when I heard a voice I recognized. Caleb. I stiffened. I turned to see Evan, a mutual friend from the gym. Evan was the kind of guy who always knew more than he should. He was a good guy, mostly, but he had a habit of sharing information in the form of half-jokes that always landed a little too close to the bone. He was a town crier disguised as a drinking buddy. "Man, how have you been?" he asked, clapping a hand on my shoulder. I nodded, polite. I kept my guard up. "Can't complain, Evan. Keeping busy." He tilted his head, looking at me with that squint-eyed assessment people give when they're digging for dirt. "Haven't seen you and Harper around together lately. Everything all right?" I kept my tone even. I focused on the apples. "Things change, Evan. You know how it is." He smirked. It was a knowing look, one that suggested he understood more than I had said. "Yeah, well," he chuckled, leaning in against his shopping cart. "Better off without the drama." "Huh?" Heard Shane bailed. That guy always did love chaos, but he runs to the hills when it lands in his lap. My hand froze on the scanner gun. The beep of the machine sounded far away. "What did you just say?" I asked. My voice was very quiet. Evan's eyes widened slightly. He realized, too late, that he had stepped into a room he wasn't invited to. He backed up a half step. "Oh," he stammered. I just meant, Shane is not hanging around anymore. Word is he ghosted Harper a couple of nights ago. Guess he didn't want to play house after all." I stared at him. I wasn't angry at Evan. I wasn't even surprised by the information. I felt hollow. It was a feeling of a puzzle piece finally clicking into place, revealing a picture I had suspected but hadn't wanted to see. "He told someone that?" I asked. Evan scratched the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. "Well, mutual friend of friend. You know how it goes, Caleb. People talk. Harper has been trying to reach him, apparently, but he is not answering. Deleted his socials. Radio silent." I nodded slowly. I felt something inside me settle. It was a dark, cold sediment settling at the bottom of a glass. Shane had vanished. The connection, the humanity she had claimed to find, the man who made her feel alive while I made her feel bored. He had cut and run the moment things got real. And Harper? Harper wasn't mourning the end of our marriage. She was mourning the loss of her safety net. She had been left chasing a man who no longer wanted to be caught. "Thanks, Evan," I said. "Hey, man, I didn't mean to." "It is okay," I said, grabbing my receipt. "Have a good weekend." I walked out into the parking lot. The sun was shining, which felt wrong. I sat in my car for a long time, just watching people load their trunks. I watched a couple arguing over where to put the milk. I watched an old man helping his wife into the passenger seat. I realized then that Harper's silence over the last few days wasn't remorse. It was shock. She wasn't contemplating how to fix us. She was reeling from being rejected by him. Back at home, I stood in the doorway for a long moment, keys still in my hand. Harper was sitting on the couch. She was pretending to read a magazine, but the pages hadn't turned in the 5 minutes I stood there watching her. A glass of water sat beside her, untouched. I watched her, but for the first time in 15 years, I didn't see my wife. I didn't see the woman I promised to protect. I saw a stranger. I saw a woman caught in a storm she had created, waiting to be rescued by a boat that had already sailed. She looked up. Her eyes were dull. She was quieter than usual. Her phone, usually glued to her hand, was lying upside down on the coffee table. She hadn't asked where I went. She didn't make a comment about the groceries. She was waiting, I realized. She was waiting for the phone to ring. She was waiting for Shane to come back and tell her it was all a mistake. But nothing was coming. That night, I went to the bedroom closet. I reached up to the top shelf and pulled down an old, dusty file box. Inside were the documents we hadn't looked at in years. Tax returns from when we were broke. Old rental agreements from our first apartment. Insurance papers. And beneath it all, I found what I was looking for. The prenup. We had signed it in better days. Back then, it felt like a formality, a joke even. We never imagined we would need it. It was just paper. Now it was a map. I walked into the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed with the file in my lap, thumbing through the pages. The paper was cool under my fingers. Harper appeared in the doorway. She was wearing her nightgown, arms wrapped around herself. "What is that?" she asked. Her voice was hesitant. "Small. Paperwork," I said without looking up. She stood there, her arms crossed like armor over her chest. She saw the header on the document. She recognized it. "You are not actually doing this," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a denial. I met her eyes. "You thought this wouldn't go that far, didn't you?" I asked. She didn't answer. She looked at the box, then at me. "Even now," I said, "you think you still have control over how this ends? You think because he left, you can just pivot back to me?" She flinched. The color drained from her face. She knew that I knew. "I never wanted to lose you," she whispered. Her voice trembled. I closed the folder gently. I placed it on the nightstand. "You didn't lose me, Harper," I said. "You handed me away." And I meant it, because something in me had shifted fundamentally. I wasn't shocked anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was done. I was simply observing the mechanics of an ending. She stood there, waiting for me to say more, waiting for me to yell, to ask about Shane, to demand details. But I didn't ask. I didn't care about the details of her betrayal anymore. I only cared about the exit. "Turn off the light when you leave," I said. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I heard her standing there for a long time, her breathing uneven in the dark. Eventually, she turned and walked away. The floorboards creaked under her weight, sounding like old bones. I closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, I didn't dream of her. I dreamed of a trail in the woods, quiet and steep, leading somewhere I hadn't been before. There's a specific kind of loneliness that only happens in a crowded room. It is the feeling of shouting underwater. You are making all the motions of participating, smiling, nodding, pouring drinks, but the sound of your own life is muffled, and no one else seems to hear it. I lit the last candle on the sideboard just as the doorbell rang. The apartment had been scrubbed clean. I had spent the afternoon erasing the dust, the clutter, the piles of mail. It felt less like I was preparing for a dinner party, and more like I was staging a house for sale. I was prepping for a departure. The scent of ginger from last week lingered faintly in the corners, a ghost of memory, now mingling with the heavier, earthier smells of roasted garlic, fresh thyme, and the tannic bite of red wine breathing in the decanter. I opened the door. Evan was the first one there, laughing before he even crossed the threshold, a six-pack of craft beer under his arm, and his fiancée trailing behind him. More followed. Mariah and Dev. Then a couple we knew from our old neighborhood. These were familiar faces. People who had sat on our couch for years, drank our wine, and watched us grow older. They brought an easy energy with them, the kind that fills a hallway instantly. And finally, Lena. She stepped inside last. She was carrying a bottle of wine, her loose curls tucked into a silk scarf, her eyes scanning the room like she knew exactly what kind of night this was going to be. She wasn't dressed up, not really. She wore dark trousers and a sweater, but she looked elegant. When her eyes met mine, she smiled softly. It wasn't a greeting, it was a check-in. She didn't linger at the door. She moved into the living room like water, finding its level. Harper didn't come out of the bedroom until the voices started rising. She appeared in the hallway like she was still deciding whether to enter her own life. She had dressed for the occasion. Casual, but carefully so. Lip gloss applied, just so. Soft curls framing her face. It was the look of someone trying to reclaim ease by force. She was trying to remind everyone, and perhaps herself, that she was a hostess, that she was a wife. She smiled too brightly when people greeted her. "Harper, long time no see," Evan said, oblivious as always. I know. She laughed, but the sound was thin. Work has been crazy. Lena, to her credit, simply nodded when Harper entered the room. Harper. "Lena," Harper replied. It was polite. It was cold. We all settled into the living room. Drinks were poured. The music played low, a jazz playlist that I used to love but hadn't listened to in years. It is funny how you forget the things that bring you peace until the noise stops. Laughter came easily from everyone. Everyone except her. Harper took a spot on the arm of the couch. It was a strategic error. It placed her too high. Too far to join any real circle, but close enough to hear every laugh that didn't include her. I stood near the window, watching the room like a director watching a play he didn't write. I watched her try to wedge herself into conversations. Dev was telling a story about his renovation nightmare. Harper leaned in. "Oh, I know exactly what you mean," she said, cutting in. "When we did the bathroom last year, the contractor was a nightmare." Dev paused. He smiled politely. "Right. Anyway, so the pipes burst." He pivoted back to the group. He didn't ask her for details. He didn't engage. It wasn't cruelty. It was momentum. The group had a rhythm, a shared frequency of people who were being honest with each other. Harper was vibrating on a frequency of desperation, and it was repelling them. They nodded politely and moved on. It wasn't orchestrated. It wasn't intentional. But it was happening. Every time Lena spoke, people leaned in. She told a story about her dog, nothing profound, but she told it with warmth, with self-deprecation. People laughed because it felt real. When Harper spoke, she was performing. She was trying to prove she was happy. She was trying to prove she was still the center of this universe. But gravity had shifted. At one point, I went to the kitchen to refill the ice bucket. I caught Harper watching Lena from across the room. Lena was standing near the bookshelf, laughing at something Mariah said. She looked at ease. She looked like she belonged there. Harper's eyes traced the curve of Lena's shoulder, the relaxed way she held her wine glass, the easy, genuine sound of her laugh. And I saw it on Harper's face. The realization. This was the first time Harper had seen herself replaced. Not in theory. Not in a suspicious text message or a paranoid thought late at night. She was seeing it in proximity. She was seeing that life, my life, our friends, this home, could function perfectly well without her at the helm. In fact, it was functioning better. She stood up abruptly. "I'll check the oven," she announced, though the oven wasn't on. She disappeared into the kitchen, brushing past me in the doorway. She smelled like expensive perfume and anxiety. I let her go. I walked over to the group. Lena passed me a small plate of olives. "You okay?" she asked, her voice low enough for just me to hear. I nodded. I took an olive. Better than I had been in months. She looked at me for a long second. It wasn't with pity. It wasn't with caution. It was just quiet acknowledgement. She saw me. "She is trying very hard," Lena murmured, glancing toward the kitchen. "I know," I said. "It is hard to watch," she added. It is, I agreed, but I'm not doing it to her, Lena. She is doing it to herself. Harper reemerged 10 minutes later. She had refreshed her lipstick. She had a new glass of wine. She wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She walked back into the living room, ready to try again. But it was too late. The party had shifted. The conversation had moved on to travel, to future plans, to things that Harper had checked out of months ago. The gravity in the room was settled. Harper, for the first time in her life, was watching from outside the orbit. She sat on the sofa, clutching her glass, nodding at the right times, laughing when others laughed. But she was a ghost. She was haunting her own dinner party. I watched her, and I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't triumph. I didn't feel good about her pain. I just felt a profound sense of distance. She looked like someone I used to know, a long time ago. The night wore on. The wine bottles emptied. The laughter grew softer, more intimate. And through it all, the divide grew wider. On one side, the warmth of connection, of truth. On the other side, a woman sitting alone on the arm of a couch, realizing that the man she had taken for granted was no longer standing in her shadow. He was standing in the light, and he wasn't looking for her. The last door closed with a soft, final click. It left behind a silence that felt sudden, like a vacuum sealing shut. The air in the apartment was thick with the scent of red wine. The ghost of laughter echoes, and the lingering warmth of bodies that had just left. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the evidence of everyone else's joy. There were plates half cleared on the side tables. A bowl of olives sat on a coaster, forgotten. A single silver earring had been left on the coffee table, glinting under the lamplight. It was the kind of mess that usually signals a good night. The kind of leftovers that don't feel like chores yet, just memories needing to be processed. But the house felt different tonight. It didn't feel like a party had just ended. It felt like a jury had just adjourned. Lena was in the kitchen again. I walked in to find her barefoot, her sleeves rolled up once more, rinsing wine glasses one by one. She was moving with that same steady, rhythmic efficiency she had shown the night of the ginger noodles. She didn't speak when I entered. I didn't speak either. Not yet. Harper hadn't been seen since dessert. Somewhere down the hall, our bedroom door had shut softly about an hour ago, right in the middle of Lena's story about a hiking trip in Sedona. No one had mentioned it. No one needed to. They all felt the shift. Everyone had seen Harper lose a room, but they had also seen something more important. Lena never reached out to take it from her. That was what made the difference. Lena hadn't fought for territory. She just occupied the space that Harper had vacated. I leaned against the counter, watching Lena dry a crystal goblet. She held up to the light, checking for spots, then set it down on the drying rack. Tonight was bold, Lena finally said. She didn't turn around. Her voice was low, thoughtful. It wasn't meant to be, I replied, rubbing the back of my neck where the tension had knotted itself. But it felt inevitable. She turned slowly, leaning her lower back against the sink. She looked at me, her expression serious. "Caleb," she said, "you know I care about you. We have history. But I am not interested in becoming the symbol of your turning point." My chest tightened, not because she was wrong, but because she had named the very thing I had been trying to avoid thinking about all night. I moved closer, stopping in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room. "You think I'm using you?" I asked. "I think you are hurting," she said gently. "And when people hurt, they reach for what is familiar. They reach for what is safe." I just happened to answer phone. "You weren't a placeholder, Lena," I said. I needed her to know that. "You weren't a prop." "I wasn't," she agreed, tilting her head to the side. "Then why do I still feel like I am standing in the middle of your marriage instead of standing in something that is mine?" I exhaled slowly. The truth of it hung between us. "Because it is not over," I said. "Not officially. That is the thing," she said. "Until it is over, really over, nothing you build will feel real. It will just be a reaction. And I don't want to be a reaction, Caleb." We stood in that space for a long time. There were no accusations, just the truth vibrating between us, low and steady. It was the kind of conversation you can only have when you aren't trying to impress someone, when you are past the age of games. I am not asking you to stay, I said quietly, but I wanted you to know you reminded me what it feels like to be seen again. Lena smiled. It was soft, but unreadable. And you reminded me that I still have boundaries, she said. She stepped past me, walking toward the entryway. She picked up her coat from the hook by the door, her fingers brushing the fabric slowly, almost like she wasn't sure yet if she wanted to leave. I followed her to the door. She turned to face me. The hallway light from the corridor outside spilled in around her, creating a halo that felt strangely appropriate. You know, she said, buttoning her coat. Harper looked at me tonight, like I had stolen something from her. You didn't, I said. She just never imagined she could lose it. She didn't lose it. Lena corrected me. Her voice was firm. She gave it away, drip by drip, day by day. That is how these things happen. You don't lose a marriage in a catastrophic event. You lose in the quiet moments where you choose yourself over your partner. I stepped closer, not for drama, not for a kiss, just to stand there with her, fully present in the weight of everything unsaid. If I walk away tonight, she asked, looking up at me, are you strong enough to finish this without me? I didn't answer right away. I checked myself. I checked the hollow feeling in my chest where the panic used to be. Yes, I said. She looked relieved, but there was still one more thing in her eyes, something small and shining. She reached up slowly and kissed my cheek. It wasn't the kiss of a lover. It wasn't a temptation. It felt like a blessing. It felt like she was returning something that didn't belong to her, handing it back to me so I could carry it myself. I liked cooking in your kitchen, she whispered near my ear, and I liked seeing you become someone who didn't need saving. My voice barely carried in the quiet hallway. Will I see you again? When there is room for me, she said. Real room, not just the space she left behind. Then she opened the door. Get it done, Caleb, she said. Then call me. And with that, she was gone. There was no final look back, no second thoughts, just clarity. She walked down the hall toward the elevator, her steps echoing on the tile. As the door clicked shut, I locked it. I stood alone in the entryway of the apartment where I had spent 15 years trying to keep everything from falling apart. I looked at the dark living room, the empty glasses, the closed bedroom door where my wife lay awake, likely listening to the silence just as I was. For years, the thought of this, of being alone, of the marriage ending, had terrified me. It had been the monster in the closet. But standing there now, in the quiet, I realized something. The monster wasn't the ending. The monster was the waiting. Now, the waiting was over. I was letting it fall. And for the first time in a very long time, that didn't feel like failure. It felt like peace. There are confessions that cleanse the soul, and there are confessions that are merely eulogies spoken over a body that is already cold. We often mistake the two. We think that simply speaking the truth is enough to fix the damage the lie caused. But as we get older, we learn that the truth has a shelf life. Spoken too late, it stops being a bridge and becomes a wall. Sunday afternoon draped itself over the apartment like a heavy wool coat. It was quiet, shapeless, and suffocating. I was sitting at the kitchen table. The sun was slicing through the blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, the only things in the room moving with any freedom. Spread out before me was a stack of papers. The prenup, a blank check for the retainer, notes scribbled on a legal pad for a move I hadn't yet vocalized. I was building a raft while the ship was still sinking. I didn't hear Harper approach until she was standing directly across from me. I stopped writing. I didn't cover the papers. I didn't try to hide what I was doing. She was wearing a loose, oversized sweater and sweatpants. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. She looked like someone who had run out of roles to play. She looked tired, not the tiredness of a long day, but the exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a heavy secret and has finally collapsed under its weight. "Can we talk?" she asked. Her voice was small. It lacked the sharp edges of Friday night. It lacked the defensive posture of Saturday morning. I didn't respond at first. I just gathered the papers into a neat pile, tapping the edges against the table to align them. When I finally looked up, Her eyes were already glassy. She sat down without waiting for permission. She pulled the chair out slowly, the scrape of wood against it sounding agonizingly loud. "I need to tell you the truth," she said. I waited. I folded my hands on top of the legal pad. "Okay." She took a breath, a shaky, uneven inhale that caught in her throat. "It wasn't just dinner," she said. Tears spilled over her lashes almost immediately. "I know you knew. I know you suspected. But I wanted to say it out loud. Not to hurt you, but because it is time." I didn't blink. "Go on." "It started about 2 months ago," she continued, staring at her hands, which were twisted together in her lap. "Shane, he was someone I could talk to. He made me feel like I mattered again. Like I wasn't just a wife or a schedule manager. I felt seen." "Shane!" I repeated the name. It felt flat in my mouth. "At first it was harmless," she said, pleading with her eyes now. "Texting. Venting about work. Then it wasn't. I didn't plan it, Caleb. I swear. But I also didn't stop it." She looked down, and I lied to myself. Over and over. I told myself it meant nothing, that it wasn't real life. But it was. "I betrayed you." Her voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. "He is gone now," she admitted. "He just disappeared. Blocked me. Ghosted me like none of it mattered. And suddenly, standing there in the silence, he left. I saw it. Everything. What I destroyed." She looked up at me, tears streaming freely down her face. It was a performance of grief, but it was also real. She was grieving, but I knew, with a cold certainty, that she wasn't grieving us. She was grieving the fantasy that had collapsed. She was grieving the safety net that had snapped. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she sobbed, "but I wanted you to know the truth from me, not from anyone else. And I am sorry, Caleb. I really am." I looked at her for a long moment. I didn't feel the urge to scream. I didn't feel the heat of jealousy, wondering what they did or where they went. I felt removed, like I was watching a character in a movie explain a plot point I had figured out 40 minutes ago. "I know you are sorry," I said finally. My voice was even. She looked hopeful for a split second, a tiny flicker of light in her eyes. She thought the confession was the currency she needed to buy her way back in. "In that case," I said, reaching for the large manila envelope sitting on the chair beside me, "I think you'll understand this." I slid the envelope across the table. It stopped inches from her hands. She looked at it. She looked at me. Her breath hitched. "What is this?" "Open it," I said. She reached out with trembling fingers. She opened the clasp. She pulled out the top document. The bold letters at the top were unmistakable. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." She gasped. It was a physical sound, like she had been struck. She dropped the paper as if it burned her. "You are really doing this," she whispered. She stared at the paper, then up at me, eyes wide with genuine shock. "I just told you the truth. I just apologized." "I know," I said, "and I appreciate the honesty, Harper. It does matter." "Then why?" She gestured to papers. I thought honesty would start the healing." "Honesty matters," I said gently. "It just doesn't undo anything." Her lip trembled. She pressed her hand to her chest, as if physically trying to hold her heart in place. "I don't want to lose everything we built. I don't want to lose you." "You already did," I replied. "You just didn't notice when it happened." She shook her head frantically. No, we can fix this. Now that everything is out in the open, we can go to therapy. I will do whatever it takes." I watched her desperation rise. It was too loud. It was too late. "You had your moment, Harper," I said, "and you spent it." "So that is it?" she asked, her voice rising to a pitch of disbelief. "No fight? No screaming match? No last words? You just hand me papers." I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the street below. Leaves were blowing across the pavement. Life was going on. "I fought for us every day you were texting him." I said, my back to her. "I fought for us every time I asked you to come home for dinner. I fought for us every time I swallowed my pride. I just didn't know I was the only one in the ring. Silence. Then softly from the table, I thought you would scream, throw something. I thought I deserved that much. I turned back to face her. Anger would mean I still cared enough to feel betrayed. I said, but I don't feel betrayed anymore, Harper. I feel done. She looked at me, searching my face for the man she used to manipulate, the man she used to wrap around her finger. He wasn't there. You loved me, she said. It was an accusation. I did, I said. I walked toward the hallway, leaving the papers between us on the table. Now I love what comes next. And I meant it, every word. I left her sitting there with the wreckage of her own choices. I went to the bedroom, pulled my suitcase from the closet, and began to pack. The sound of the zipper was the only answer she was going to get. The next evening came cold and early. The sky outside the bedroom window began to dim by 5 o'clock, turning the world a bruised shade of purple. It was the kind of twilight that makes you feel like the day is over before it ever really started. I moved slowly through the apartment. I wasn't rushing. There's a frantic energy to running away, but I wasn't running. I was simply relocating. I folded what little I needed into a small leather duffel bag. Some clothes, a shaving kit, a book Lena had given me years ago that I had never finished reading. I didn't pack any photos. I didn't take any mementos. I left a framed wedding picture on the dresser. I left the watch she gave me for our 10th anniversary in the drawer. Taking them would imply that I wanted to remember this version of us. I didn't. I wanted to remember who I was before I became half of a hollow equation. The sound of the zipper slicing shut was louder than it should have been. It was a final, jagged note in a symphony of silence. Harper stood in the bedroom doorway. She was barefoot, her arms crossed tight against her chest. She hadn't spoken since I handed her the divorce papers the day before. The shock had silenced her. But now, seeing the bag on the bed, seeing the reality of the departure, her silence cracked. "You're leaving tonight?" she asked. Her voice was low, raw around the edges. It sounded like she'd been crying, or screaming into a pillow, or perhaps just staring at a wall for 24 hours. I didn't stop checking the pockets of the bag. "Yeah." "Where?" she asked. "Someplace quieter." "Not far." It was a question laced with panic. She needed to know I was still within reach. She needed to know the tether hadn't been completely severed. I finally looked up. "Does it matter, Harper?" She stepped into the room. She moved cautiously, like the floor might give way beneath her. "You are just walking out." "It is already over," I said, lifting the bag off the bed. The weight of it felt good in my hand. It felt manageable. "I am just leaving the stage." She flinched. "You don't have to do this. We can talk about the papers. We can wait." I shrugged. "I already did the waiting. You just didn't see it." I moved past her toward the front hall. I didn't brush against her. I didn't make a production of avoiding her. I just walked a path that didn't include her space. She followed me. I could hear her bare feet slapping softly on the hardwood, a desperate, pattering sound. Desperation had finally overtaken her pride. "Stay," she said suddenly. I stopped near the front door. I set the bag down and reached for my coat. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "Caleb, please. We can fix this." I pulled on my coat. I adjusted the collar. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. The man looking back at me looked tired, yes, but he also looked clear-eyed. He looked like someone who had finally woken up from a long, confusing dream. "We can't fix something you still think you deserve to keep," I said to the reflection, then turned to her. She stepped closer. She reached out a hand, but didn't quite touch my sleeve. "I am ready now," she pleaded. "I get it. I see what I did. I will do the work. Therapy, couples counseling, full honesty, whatever you want. I will delete every contact. I will change jobs if I have to." I looked at her. I really looked at her. For a second, just a split second, I let myself see her the way I used to. I saw the woman I had built a life around. I saw the history. I saw the comfort of the known. It would be so easy to drop the bag. It would be so easy to stay, to let her cry, to let her apologize, to spend the next 5 years rebuilding a vase that had been smashed into dust. But then I remembered the silence. I remembered the feeling of waiting for a text that never came. I remembered the dinner with Mark. I remembered the arrogance in her voice when she told me I was boring. She wasn't that person anymore. And neither was I. "I don't want you to do the work for me, Harper," I said softly. "I'm doing it for us," she insisted. "No," I said. "You want to do the work because you lost. You want to do the work because the other option, Shane, didn't pan out. You aren't fighting for me. You are fighting for your safety." Tears filled her eyes again, spilling over instantly. "That is not fair." "It is the truth," I said. "And I don't want to be the consolation prize you settle for, because the adventure didn't work out." I picked up the bag again. "You are just going to leave me here?" she asked, her voice small and childlike. "Alone?" I nodded. "Until the papers are final, it is still your place. I won't fight you for the apartment. You can keep the furniture. You can keep the view." She stepped closer, invading my personal space, trying to use proximity to force connection. "But you aren't even angry." "No," I said, grabbing my keys from the bowl. The metal felt cold and final in my palm. Anger belongs to people who are still fighting for something. Anger implies passion. I don't have either left for this. She blinked, confused by the lack of heat in my voice. "Is there someone else?" "Not yet," I said, "but I know what peace looks like now, and I know I can't find it here." A long silence followed. The hallway felt like a tunnel. Then, brokenly, she whispered, "I thought we would get past this. I really thought we had enough history to survive a mistake." I opened the door. The cool air from the corridor rushed in, smelling of floor wax and rain. "We could have," I said, not looking back at her. "We could have survived a mistake, Harper, but we couldn't survive the disrespect." I stepped out. "Please, Caleb," she whispered one final plea. "I am ready to work on it now." I turned to her, my hand still on the doorframe. I looked at her one last time. I didn't see a villain. I just saw a woman who had miscalculated the cost of her own ego. My voice was soft. It wasn't cruel. It was just a fact. "You had your moment," I said, and then I walked out. The lock clicked behind me. It was a sharp, mechanical sound. It was the sound of a book closing. It was the sound of a contract expiring. I walked down the long hallway toward the elevator. I didn't look back at the door. I knew she was standing on the other side, pressing her ear against the wood, listening to my footsteps fade away. I knew she was waiting for me to stop, to turn around, to come back and yell, to come back and fight. But I kept walking. I pressed the button for the lobby. The door slid open. I stepped inside. As the heavy metal doors closed, shutting out the floor where I had lived the last decade of my life, I exhaled. I was alone. I had no plan for dinner. I was staying in a short-term rental on the other side of town. My life was in a bag. And for the first time in years, I breathed. I really breathed. The air reached the bottom of my lungs. I wasn't happy yet. That would take time. But I was free. And standing there in the quiet hum of the descending elevator, I realized that freedom wasn't a destination. It was simply the refusal to stay where you are not loved. 3 weeks passed. Autumn settled into the city like a secret kept between turning leaves and fading sunlight. The air grew crisp, smelling of wood smoke and rain. Everything felt gentler now, quieter. My mornings weren't haunted by the sound of footsteps I was trying to interpret. My evenings weren't loaded with silences I had to decode. I didn't count the days since I left the apartment. I stopped looking at the calendar as a measure of survival. Instead, I counted peace. I counted the number of times I made coffee without wondering if I was making it too loud. I counted the books I finally finished reading. I was staying in a small rental near the park. It was sparse, furnished with things that weren't mine, but it felt more like home than the house I had paid a mortgage on for a decade. It was empty of history, and that emptiness was a luxury. Lena and I hadn't spoken much since the night she stepped back into the elevator. We exchanged a few texts, short, polite check-ins. She was giving me space. She was letting the dust settle before trying to walk on the floorboards. But tonight, The universe decided the waiting period was over. We ran into each other in the most ordinary of ways. It was a lobby of a bookstore near closing time. The kind of place where people go when they don't want to be alone, but also don't want to talk to anyone. She was standing near the new releases, holding a small paperback. Her hair was pinned back with a clip I hadn't seen before. She wore reading glasses, which she usually hid. She looked unguarded. "You always find the quietest corners," she said, looking up as I approached. She didn't startle. It was as if she had expected me to materialize from the shelves. "I had to," I replied, shoving my hands into my coat pockets. "It is the only place the ghosts don't follow." She laughed gently. It was a warm sound, low and grounding. She closed the book and placed it back on the stack. She studied my face, scanning for the tension that used to live in my jaw, the worry that used to line my forehead. "You look lighter," she said. I nodded. I felt it, too. I left a version of myself behind, Lena. Turns out, I didn't miss him as much as I thought I would. "Good," she said. He was tired. We left the store together. We didn't plan it. We just fell into step. We stopped at the corner shop and grabbed 2 cups of warm apple cider, steaming against the chill of the evening. We walked aimlessly through the quiet streets, the city slowing down around us. She didn't ask where I was staying. I didn't offer the address. She didn't ask about the divorce lawyers or the paperwork. She didn't ask about Harper. That was a gift Lena gave me, the absence of the past. She allowed me to just be a man walking down the street on a Tuesday in October. And then, like the last test the universe had to offer, we saw her. We were crossing the street near the old farmer's market, the pavement slick with damp leaves. Harper was walking toward us on the opposite sidewalk. She had a tote bag slung over one shoulder, a scarf blowing the wind. She looked different. Thinner, maybe, or perhaps just less substantial. She walked with her head down, focused on the ground, lacking that imperious chin-up stride she used to have. She looked up just as we reached the median. She saw me instantly. She paused. Her boot stopped on the concrete. The wind whipped her hair across her face, and she brushed it away with a frantic hand. I waited for the reaction. I waited for my heart to hammer against my ribs. I waited for the rush of anger or longing or even pity. I waited for the instinct to go to her, to ask if she was okay. But nothing happened. Time didn't slow. My breath didn't catch. I just noticed her. I saw her like you see a painting you once loved in a museum. You recognize the brushstrokes. You remember how it used to make you feel. But it no longer stirs anything inside you. It hangs on the wall, and you walk past it. Her eyes flicked to Lena beside me, then back to me. I saw her mouth open slightly. She looked like she wanted to speak. She looked like she wanted to shout or wave or say something final that would bridge the 6 lanes of traffic and the ocean of silence between us. But she didn't, because Lena, without a word, took one small step closer to me. She didn't touch me. She didn't grab my hand to stake a claim. She didn't glare at Harper with triumph. She just existed. She stood fully, calmly, in that moment between me and my past. She was a solid presence, a warm anchor in the cold wind. And Harper understood. I watched the realization wash over her face from 20 feet away. She saw that I wasn't alone anymore. Not just physically, but emotionally. She saw that the space beside me was no longer a vacancy. She could return to whenever she felt safe enough. It was occupied. She gave a small, hollow nod. It wasn't a greeting. It was a concession. She tightened her grip on her tote bag, lowered her head, and walked away. She turned the corner and vanished into the shadows of the evening. No scene, no protest, no dramatic confrontation. Just a quiet, crushing realization that I was already gone long before I ever packed a bag. I watched the empty corner for a second longer, then turned forward. Lena glanced at me. "You okay?" I looked at her. I really looked at her. The streetlights reflected in her glasses, the steam rising from her cup, the way she stood, patient and steady, waiting for me to decide how I felt. For the first time, I realized I wasn't looking at a rescue boat. I was looking at a partner. I saw someone who wasn't trying to fix me, wasn't trying to break me, and certainly wasn't trying to use me to fill a void in herself. She just wanted to see me. "I am now," I said. She smiled. It was a smile I had missed for years without knowing it. "Good," she said. We kept walking. The sidewalk stretched ahead of us, lined with trees dropping gold and red leaves under our feet. There was no destination in mind. We had no reservations to get to. We had no curfew to beat. We just had the forward motion. And somewhere between the warmth of her shoulder brushing mine and the bite of the autumn air, I realized a final truth. I didn't need revenge on Harper. I didn't need her to suffer. I didn't need apologies. And I didn't even need closure. Closure is a myth we tell ourselves to make the ending hurt less. I just needed to remember who I was before I started dimming my own light to make someone else comfortable. I had spent so many years turning down the volume of my own life so she could hear herself think. I had made myself smaller so she could feel big. But standing there, breathing the cold, clean air, I knew that part of my life was over. I took a sip of the cider. It was sweet and sharp. "Where to?" Lena asked, looking at the crosswalk ahead. "Anywhere," I said. "I'm in no rush." And I wasn't. For the first time in a long time, I had all the time in the world, and I was done dimming.